Hey everybody, my name is Jim, and today we're going to be talking about vintage Fender specs and modern Fender specs, because one of the greatest things about the internet is the amount of access we have to information. You can go from knowing next to nothing about any given topic as far down the rabbit hole as you want, and I think that that's awesome. But unfortunately, sometimes things that are subjective, things that are just opinions, often can become stereotypes and be taken as fact. We're going to try and dispel some of those today about vintage spec Fenders, why I prefer vintage spec Fenders, and just some insight in case you're confused by all the kind of specs that get listed out, whether it's the fret wire, the radius, or the hardware that comes along with these sorts of guitars. I also thought that this would be a perfect opportunity to make this sort of video, seeing as though I have a road-worn Vintera 2 that's the standard limited edition that has the vintage size fret wire and a 7¼ inch radius, and I also have this dealer exclusive. This one has a 9½ inch radius and medium jumbo frets that I'm borrowing from Zounds. So I want to start by talking about fret wire first, and why I prefer the vintage size fret wire and 7¼ inch radius on the vintage style Fender instruments. All of my Fender guitars have vintage size frets. It's all going to come down to your playing style. For me, I'm somebody who loves to slide around the instrument. I'm playing a lot of funk. I'm doing a lot of quick chord transitions and things like that. And I love being able to feel the fretboard underneath my fingers. It's really just kind of a feel thing for me and what I prefer in the styles of music that work for me. Compared to medium jumbo, I don't notice that big of a difference because the height isn't that far off between the two of them. But really, when I look at modern guitars, one of the main reasons that I don't get along with something like an American Professional 2 as much as something like this is all down to the fret wire, because the radius isn't that different. Yes, I prefer the 7¼ inch radius, but compared to a 9½, I don't feel the difference as much with that as I do when I change to something that has narrow tals versus vintage size frets. When you're sliding around, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. The taller frets, the narrow tals, they're going to feel like train tracks if you're used to the smaller fret wire, and that's the exact sort of experience that I have. And a lot of players, maybe they don't play the same styles of music that I do, or maybe they're just playing a little bit more lead or things like that where they can take advantage of the taller feel that you're going to get out of those frets. But for me, I just prefer this. It works really well for me. Another thing that you should take into consideration, regardless if you have vintage specs or modern specs, is your action and also the amount of relief that you have in the truss rod. And we're going to get to adjusting the truss rod because a lot of people complain about this on vintage spec Fender guitars momentarily, but I like mine to basically have as little relief as possible, meaning that the neck is fairly straight and the action just low enough so I'm not getting any buzzing. Can I get the action as low on this guitar as I can on this guitar? No, I don't think I can, but it's not so far off that it's a deal breaker for me. And I'm somebody, again, I'm sliding around the instrument, so ideally I don't want the action to be super high off the fingerboard in order to be able to play the way that I like. Going on to the newer sorts of styles with the 9½ inch and the medium jumbos, there are a lot of Fender guitars that offer this sort of style, not just this road-worn Vintera 2. I like it. It's really easy and it's really not a big deal to switch between these two instruments because they are very similar in that sense. One of the big advantages that you do get with medium jumbo guitars, and you have to remember, Gibson instruments, despite the fact that they've always come with a 12-inch radius since, they were introduced originally, but they just bend a little bit easier. So if you're somebody who plays a little bit more lead, you might enjoy that a little bit more. It might work out more for you, but it's not something that really applies to me. Again, personal preference, something that is going to come down to the styles that you play and what role you play in the bands or the works that you're working on. Now I want to address some common complaints I see people make about vintage style guitars. Number one has to be the fact that you don't have truss rod access at the top of the headstock. They say it's an absolute deal breaker. It shouldn't be like that. It's wrong. You need to just get with the times. It's just inexcusable. And there's been some other words used to describe the vintage style truss rod placement at the butt of the neck on vintage style Fender guitars. But first of all, just to be clear here, under normal circumstances, you don't need to do any sort of adjustment to your truss rod more than a handful of times in a year total. So adding on, in the worst case scenario with a guitar like a Jazzmaster, a Jaguar, or a Stratocaster, 10 extra minutes to your setup is not the end of the world to me. If it's that big of a deal to you, I mean, more power to you, but it's not this hugely intensive labor-inducing process that some people make it out to be. But even better, I love telecasters, and with them, it's even easier to make adjustments because all you need is a screwdriver and then one of these tools. This is a Hosco Japan truss rod adjustment wrench. To adjust a truss rod on a vintage style telecaster is so simple. You basically are just going to remove the pickguard. Now, what I should have done was had a little power drill here to expedite this process while I do it, but I'm just going to give you an idea of how long it takes for me to actually do this. That took 90 seconds to get all of the screws out, but once we're done with that, all we're going to do is we're going to use the bridge as a way to kind of hold the pickguard in position and give us access to the little route that we have here that allows me to put the truss rod wrench right in where I need it to go. And then all I would do, this is already set up the way I would like it, is you have the freedom to turn. That's it. That's it. I don't advise doing it under tension. You want to loosen the strings when you do want to make adjustments and then tighten back up to tune and feel how the guitar is actually playing if you like the relief in the neck, or perhaps take some out or add some in depending on what you prefer. But it's not that hard. You're not really adding that much time. So this whole, oh, it's just such a labor-inducing process to adjust a truss rod on a vintage guitar and a Telecaster especially is absolute nonsense. With a vintage style Stratocaster, Jazzmaster, or Jaguar, the process is a little bit more of a pain in the butt, but again, we're talking about adding in 5 minutes worth of work here. You want to put a capo on the first fret after you've slacked the strings a little bit, remove the neck very carefully, and unfortunately, unlike a Telecaster, it's not something that you could easily do just sitting in your lap. I would advise that you do it on a proper kind of workbench where you have a little station that you can sit the guitar on. Take the neck off very, very carefully, make any minor adjustments from there. And by having the capo on the first fret, you're going to make sure that things aren't just going to pop out of the tuners. When you're done, put it back in, and then slowly and very, very, very carefully screw the neck back in. And this is something that goes beyond just vintage specs and modern specs. You don't want to screw so hard that it's just like you can feel that there's no room left for you to turn as far as the tightness of the screws that are going back into the neck. You want it to be just snug. You don't have to over tighten it too much. Found this helpful, useful, and or entertaining, or perhaps you have any further questions that I didn't address today because I didn't want to do too much yapping, believe it or not. Let me know in the comments section down below, but I am out of here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Take it easy, everybody.